Hello, hello, and happy Wednesday, March 15th. My name is Rosella Ide White, and I am the Love Big Coach. My singular focus as a coach is to nurture more life-giving and justice-seeking love in this world so we all can thrive. I am really excited about today's conversation. So for those that have been on the site and who have been journeying with me this Women's History Month, I have started a series called Elevate Coaching, a conversation series that's inviting this month women coaches who are helping us consider new possibilities and create new realities through the power of coaching. I'm excited today because I have my friend Denise Alexandra, who is the owner and founder of A Beautiful Mindset Coaching, who is a divorce coach for women who are navigating the tumultuous waters. That's how I often talk about divorce. And she is an incredible coach, guide, accompanier, and someone who has been on this road. So I'm excited to introduce you to Denise. Welcome, Denise.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be talking to you about all this today.
Yes.
We've had many conversations in the past, and it just seems like we could go on forever. So let's see what happens today.
Absolutely. So there are some of the folks that are a part of my community that know that I was married many moons ago. And it's been 10 and a half years. It'll be 11 years in July that I've been divorced. And I think one of the things that I told you when we were together in Florida is like, man, if I would have known that there was a divorce coach back in the day, I would have absolutely engaged someone in this realm. So how about you start just by telling us a little bit about your story and how you got into coaching with this focus on divorce particularly.
Okay. Yeah, so I was married for 18 years and my marriage came to an end in 2019. And at that point, I was in the process of getting my PhD in art history and kind of realized that there was no future for me in art history in Tampa, Florida. It's not the art hub over here. And I didn't want to teach. And so I started thinking about what I would want to do for a living. Like, what was I good at? What was I interested in at? What was I interested in? What do other people say I'm good at? And so after doing a lot of research, I came across life coaching, got my certification, and then decided to focus on working with women who were also going through a divorce. So the reason why I chose that as kind of like my specialty is because I feel like I made it through my divorce pretty well. I would say, I can proudly say that I exited my marriage with my head held high, with my dignity, my self-respect, and with confidence. And it made me realize that this might be something I can pass on to other women as well. Personally, I always thought a divorce would be the worst thing that could ever happen to me.
Yeah.
And when it actually did happen, I realized that it doesn't have to be the War of the Roses. It doesn't have to be like this, end of the world event that defines you for the rest of your life. And so I just decided to change my mindset about it and kind of see it as the second half of my life is starting. I was also turning 40 the same year. So instead of sitting there and saying, my life is over, who will want me now at 40 with a daughter, like who's going to want that, who's going to want my baggage, all these things that I think we as women tend to tell ourselves. I'm just like, no, I have a lot to offer. I'm educated, I'm ambitious, I'm a nice person. I have this whole life ahead of me, and I'm going to embrace that and make the best of it, because we only live once. That's like my big thing that I always tell friends as well. Is like, how long are you going to stay miserable? Like, we have this one life.
Listen.
Let's stop this and just do the best that you can. And yeah, and so I just decided that's something that I wanted to kind of pass along. And though as coaches, of course, we don't tell our clients what to do, right? It's very much client-led, the coaching sessions. I do think that there's a value in offering a different perspective. And I know that's not always possible in every case. Obviously, there's cases of abuse and things like that where, you can't get divorced amicably. But what is important is if you are interested in an amicable divorce, the way you start your divorce usually sets the tone on how it's going to go. If
That
you
is
start
so true.
nasty, it's probably going to end nasty. And at the end of the day, myself and also my clients, do they want to look in the mirror 10 years from now thinking, what did I do? Who was I? Who was this person? That was terrible. I embarrassed myself. I acted crazy. Oh my gosh, my kids saw this, all these things. Or do you want to look in the mirror saying, wow, I did the right thing. I handled myself with grace. My children, have been, well, you can't say spared because every child that goes through a divorce is a child of divorce, but you know what I mean? I did the best by my children, and I knew that was the route that I wanted to take. And I hope that, I can somehow pass that on to my clients.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You just shared so many amazing nuggets and we're going to dig into it. And I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about our journeys of divorce, just from kind of a high level space, because I think that there's so many, and I know this, right? The women that we experience who are navigating or contemplating it, there's so much fear around what would happen, right? And I'm when we're going to say this, right, we're talking about women that are not in particularly abusive situations where their life is on, like their literal life is in danger. I think that's a different conversation to have in terms of what would need to happen to navigate those spaces. But for many of us, if that's not part of our story, right, if it's a matter of we're in a relationship, it is not the relationship that we had wanted or hoped it would be, we have come to some understanding about who we are and who we're not, right? I think there's so much emotional, both grief, baggage, feelings that is part and parcel to even exploring or considering divorce. So I guess I'm interested from your standpoint. You said that like you shifted your mindset, but in some respects, getting a divorce as a woman, like we're making a choice and we're choosing ourselves. So that journey of choosing yourself, right? What were parts of yourself or parts of that journey that you would highlight today in terms of, this is when I recognized that this was a choice that I needed to make for me, and then ultimately, right, for your child and everything else. But how did you get to that place of choosing yourself, especially in a culture that says we're supposed to choose everyone and everything else, whether it's parents' expectations, partner expectations, children expectations? You chose yourself. How did you get to that place?
Well, so first off, I just want to mention that I was actually not the one who wanted the marriage to end, though I did file, but I was not the one who wanted it to end. So it's not like I chose something else over my marriage.
Yeah.
Where I did choose myself, though, was in the way I wanted to handle everything. And it's interesting because you said I was choosing myself. I was, but I was doing it keeping in mind that I wanted to do the best for Isla as well. Like she was my focus. That whole 6 months of separation and then up until mediation, a lot of the decisions I made were based on what I felt was best for her. But also, and this is what I tell my clients, you also have to make decisions that are good for you. So an important thing is like, where are you going to live and everything? It's like wherever you choose to live, if you want to move, that's the space where you also have to be happy. You have to have a network. You have to have people around you, like not just what makes your kid happy, because at the end of the day, what makes me happy will also make her happy, because it's important for us to. So that's part of the mindset shift too, is like I had to do and show up in a more positive way, in a more, life embracing way. I don't know the right word for it, but like I couldn't just go and fall into this deep hole and like go into this, my life is ending, because it really wasn't. So I don't, that's a good question. How would it have been had I not had her?
Yeah. And
how would how would I have decided, like what decisions would I have made if it wasn't for her?
Yeah. And I think that that's a real like question or exploration for women, because everybody's situation is different, right? And we're specifically talking about women because that is the focus of both of our, I think, coaching in terms of who we support, but everyone's different. If you have children, right, depending on what your livelihood, how it's set up, depending on if it's you choosing to get the divorce or if your partner is the one who no longer wants to be in the marriage. And from how I've experienced you, you are someone who has been making choices that, like you said, you can look back on later and say, oh,
Yeah.
I'm proud of myself for
Mhm.
doing this. And it takes courage, right? All of this takes courage. So from your vantage point as someone who coaches women who are contemplating or navigating this, what are some of those things that women bring? What are the themes that you see that are coming to you around, I'm thinking about this, or I don't know what's going to happen? Like, what are those things that you help or you coach women around as they're navigating these decisions?
I would say fear is, of course, the number one. And that's a fear of the uncertainty, like what
Mm.
lies behind my life after divorce.
Mhm.
Some have known just this life for 20 years and are really worried about what it's going to look like after. Are they going to have to start working? How will they be financially? What will life for the kids look like? Will they ever find another partner? There's just so much. So it's almost like it's better to, what would you say, the devil that you know versus the one that you don't know or
Yeah,
something. So it's
yeah,
like, they're like, well, this is actually not so bad. I'm not getting abused. I'm not getting, I can just, I can stick it out for the kids, but really they're like completely unhappy. But, so there's that, there's the financial aspect. There's the worry about how it's going to affect the kids. Meanwhile, I would like to say that kids know what's going on, or they know that
always,
something is going on,
always.
and they
Yep.
pick up on it, and they pick up on the tension in the house. And so the
Mhm.
question is, would the kids benefit from having two happy parents in separate homes that co-parent peacefully and successfully, rather than having two unhappy parents in one home where it's just tension all the time? So, so finances, uncertainty, how is it going to affect the kids? Those are the major ones, I would say. And then, of course, if the marriage ends abruptly due to the other party, then there's a lot of heartbreak involved, a lot of heartbreak,
Yeah,
a lot of grieving. And you said it right, it is grieving.
yeah.
You grieve not only the life and the love that you had, but also what you thought you would have in the future. It's
And
really,
that's,
really hard. I 100%, you go through those 5 steps of grieving, just kind of like you do after a loss.
yeah. And it's, for me, it was really interesting because it really was, yes, I grieved in the moment in the relationship. I think that I had grieved the relationship before I grieved what I
Mm-hmm.
had hoped. So, they often say that women have made the decision. By the time a woman, especially if a woman is the one deciding to end it, by the time a woman decides, like, she's gone through a lot of the emotional rigmarole of like trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what to do whenever we're making a decision, right? By the time a woman generally says the decision, whatever it is in any capacity, we've been thinking about it, we've talked to people about it, we've kind of gone through all of those things.
Yeah.
I think that I was not prepared for the grief that happened when it was announced, and then what I
Mm-hmm.
grieved by way of like, oh, I had hoped, right? Like I always think about like the death of hope as a profound loss that we don't really talk about, right? Like this
Yeah,
life that
that's
I had
true.
hoped for, the things that we were creating, all of this stuff, that was the stuff that kind of knocked me off my feet, like in a different way, right?
God, sorry.
No, I love it. Actually, I love that because y'all, Denise is actually really funny and silly. So I love that your cat made an appearance. Um, but yeah, like
Yeah.
that, the grief, it's like compounded. It's not just, oh, the relationship is over. It's like all of the hopes, all of the things. And then even some of the, whether it's the expectations being a woman, especially in the United States, and I think I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective because you're someone who was raised internationally.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you think about relationships, marriage, divorce, like, yeah, I'm just curious about your thoughts about that, how it's handled here versus other places, the expectations of women, all of that, because we talked a little bit about that too.
Yeah. So I think in general, I think in America, relationships move a little faster than in Europe. I mean, I have friends that are in their 40s now. They've been together for 20 years and they're not married.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not unusual for couples to be together for a really long time, and marriage isn't really a factor. Whereas I
Mm-hmm.
feel like in the US, it's very much about, we go to college, start off with a job, get engaged, get married, have first kid by 30 at the latest, then have
Mm-hmm.
more kids. It's just, I don't know, it's just very different. And I feel like maybe that's the problem, is like relationships are between two or more people that have feelings, emotions, traumas, personalities. And it doesn't work that way. Like you can't all put people on the same path. Like I feel like society is putting us all on the same path, and that's just not going to work for everyone. And so I feel like things move faster in the US. In Europe, I feel like it's just, there's not that much pressure on this timeline. And couples are having children later, getting married later, staying together longer. And there's just never a, what, you've been together 6 years and you don't live together, for example? Like it's not that big of a deal.
The rush, I feel like the urgency that's part and parcel here in the States, along with, I'm sure there's something to be said about the way religion like plays a thread in our lives here. And I mean, even our economic systems, right? Like there's some like everything is better if you're married, right? Versus individually like having some of that parsed out. So what I'm curious about, like, and we've talked about this too, when you're navigating, considering discerning divorce, right? I think it's important to think about your team, right? Like the people that are part and parcel to your team. So when you think about divorce and the people that you're experiencing and supporting, who makes up the team? Who are people that you either had on your team or that you wish that women knew? And then what's the role of the coach in that? So like, who makes up the team? I'm stacking questions. And then what's the role of the coach on the team?
Well, I think it all starts with the coach, to be honest with you. I think I'm there to help the client, again, figure out how they want the divorce to go. No. So how do you want the divorce to go? How do you want the co-parent, if there's children involved, how do you want your co-parenting relationship to be? Because that affects how you start this divorce. What do you want financially? Because divorce is a negotiation. You got to come to the table and say what you would like. Whether you're going to get that is another question. Obviously, there's laws and things like that. But so I help my client become clear on what they want. And then you figure out what type of an attorney do you want. There's attorneys that specialize in amicable divorces, for example. Or do you want a shark that wants to take you to trial? I mean, obviously that's not what I advocate for, but okay, that is a choice. And then kind of see where the client stands. And I had on my team a forensic accountant who dug through all the finances, because my ex-husband and I were completely overwhelmed with it. Like, and we just wanted everything to be fair. We didn't want anybody trying to accuse the other one of screwing them over or anything like that. So we just hired an accountant. We had a family counselor who helped us come up with a parenting plan, an age-appropriate parenting plan for Isla, which at that time she was 5. And between the three of us, we decided that, 1 week on, 1 week off would be too much for her at that age, but it just helps because you don't know, you just want to do the right thing. Like, you don't know what's best for the child sometimes, like what's appropriate, what do people do? So it's nice to have these experts to guide you, and so that helped. So I had an attorney. Unfortunately, I didn't have a divorce coach. I had the family counselor, the forensic accountant. Of course, I had a therapist who's known me for a while, and so she kind of helped me as well. So I'm all about getting help and asking for help. Divorce can be really lonely and isolating, and it can kill your self-esteem. And just knowing that you don't have to go through it alone is a huge thing, I think, because sometimes even our families aren't encouraging or supporting.
Well, and sometimes our families have relationships with our partner in a way that, like, I mean, at least for me, we're still relationships. And at some point, I remember saying this to my therapist, and I've shared this with my family as well. Like, I just want someone to choose me. Like, I want someone on my side, right? Like, and I mean, you're talking about if the longer you've been together, they're couple friends, they're all of these other relationships. So I think I want people to know that, like, if you are contemplating this, it is not easy, but it doesn't have to be nasty, and it's not the end of your life. It definitely is not. I mean, I think about holy endings and new beginnings. And so, I'm curious, you talk about self-esteem and kind of the after effects. So someone's working with you, right? They say, I'm going to reach out I'm contemplating this. I've made the decision. You journey with them pre-divorce, during the divorce. What does the work look like after? Right? The paperwork has been signed. And this is a process depending on the state you live in, right? Between when you file and when you can actually get the legal divorce, all of this takes time. But what is the support that you offer afterwards, especially when it comes to self-esteem and redefining yourself now as this single person, right? What does that look like post-divorce?
Well, so the number one thing I tell clients is to not feel bad about grieving and to actually embrace the grieving, because you can't just be like, okay, divorce paper signed, and then, hey, well, I'm going to go out drinking every weekend and I'm going to go do this. And all you're doing is numbing. Like if you start getting into that, you're never going to process this. You do have to process it and cry if you want, melt down, do all the things, go one of those, what are they, axe throwing things, get it all out, but don't ignore it, don't try to be stoic and ignore what you're feeling, because it will come up again at another time, and it might be your next relationship. Girl, so you don't process it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I say that all the time. Grief will have its way with you. So embrace it, because I think when you embrace it, you're able to kind of ride those waves. But when you try to push it down or ignore it or numb it, it's going to come up and come out in ways that I think are much more disruptive. Yeah. I know, right? Like I'm speaking. So as you said that, I was like, yes, embrace the grief.
Yeah. And it's like I said, you don't want it to come out when you finally met somebody new that you want to be with, and you're just like vomiting all this stuff, that you haven't processed onto that person. So I'm a big believer in therapy as well, in coaching. And then also just figuring out, like for me, I had to figure out like, where do I want to live? Like, how do I want to live? Like, what's my day going to look like? It was hard adjusting to it, because I just sat here, when Isla was at her dad's on the days where I didn't have her, I'm like, okay. I had never lived on my own before, ever. I moved from my parents' house in with my ex-husband. So it was the first time living alone. And it takes some adjusting. And some people might think it's wonderful, but it's not in the beginning when you don't choose this path. Right. So it's about just kind of finding your way again, like, hanging out with your friends and just doing things that maybe you've always been interested in, but you haven't had the time to do. It could be anything. It could be getting the other degree. It could be starting a new job, anything. And it could be anything. It could be a hobby. You can start sewing, it's just, instead of being like, what do I do now? Just open your mind and think about, what have I always wanted to do that I actually have time to do now? And, that's something that mothers struggle with, when all of a sudden their child is not with them every day. And that's another part of the grief process. And I could not imagine waking up one morning without her. Yeah. I was angry about that was taken away from me, basically. But again, instead of sitting here and thinking, this is terrible, this sucks, it's like, okay, what am I going to do with those mornings? I get to sleep in, maybe I can go to the gym. I can, do all the things that I did before having a child, it really is a whole thing of finding a new life post-divorce. And a lot of it is just working with a coach and becoming clear on what that is. Yeah. And then in terms of the self-esteem, a divorce definitely can ruin your self-esteem. I mean, I think us as women struggle with self-esteem on a good day at times. And then imagine having gone through something like that, where that leaves you. And that will take time to come back. And for me, it was doing things that were hard for me in the past that I shied away from because I'm shy, or I'm this, I don't think I'm that, and just doing it and realizing I can do this. I can actually do this. So you learn confidence and you gain self-esteem by doing the things that you're afraid of or that you thought you couldn't do. I mean, for me, it wasn't about like looks or anything for me. It was like about my life, that maybe I was insecure about.
Well, and people who know me know that I share, like I'm a vulnerable sharer. So I've said this before, I've written about it. After my divorce, I mean, I got divorced, I was turning 31. So I met my ex-husband in my early 20s. I was 22, 23 when we met. And my divorce became official right before my 31st birthday. So for all intents and purposes, my 20s were
Mm-hmm.
spent with my now ex-husband. And he was also a pastor. So that meant that our life looked a certain way that I didn't always get to choose. And so I will also say, after my divorce, I did all sorts of things, right? And I ended up, at that point, I was blogging, and I started pole dancing, and I wrote a post called Rediscovering My Soul Through the Power of the Pole. And it was probably one of the best things that I did for myself, because I had become so disconnected from my body for a variety of reasons. But the self-esteem did a doozy. So by the time my divorce was finalized, I was pretty sure that I was asexual, that I was not interested. And I recognized that that was just part and parcel of my own baggage, my own trauma, my own grief. And I was able to then try some things and get myself into a different mindset. And I had a therapist on my team. I had a couple of therapists, because at that point I was, also seeing a psychiatrist with medication management. I had some religious folks. I was working in the churches at that point, so I had a pastoral support system. But I keep thinking about now what I know about coaching, how coaching would have shifted and maybe not necessarily shortened the time, but I think would have invited me to consider what you're talking about. Who am I? What do I want? What am I actually grieving? What is now possible, right? Because even though I was the one who instituted the divorce, it was after we need to do therapy, we need to do this, and things just were not changing. And I was like, I cannot continue to do this if there is no change. And so I did it begrudgingly. It was like, I'm mad that I have to do this because this is not really what I want. But if there isn't, right, this mutual effort to make this thing different, then we've got to do something, right? And I did that. And I still felt what you were describing of well, damn, my ex-husband and I actually were really good friends, and we could spend all day together. We had similar interests. So it was now, like you said, I'm looking around this house, I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I'm really trying to figure out, who am I, especially during those formative years. And now, what do I want and what could be possible? So, I'm a huge fan of coaching and of the work that you do specifically, because I think it would help more women who are in this situation, I think regardless of how they got there, feel empowered, feel nurtured and supported, and be able to move into the next chapter of their lives with confidence, and with support. So, go ahead.
Yeah, the importance I was going to say about the support is, of course, we have support from friends and family sometimes, but a lot of times it's more like, well, you should do this and you should do that, and you should take him for everything that he owns, and you should move here because that's where grandma is, all these things, and because they're bringing their own interests into it in a way. Whereas with coaching, I'm just here, to ask you, what do you want? No, not what does Denise think you should do? What do you want, and how can we get you there together? And it's nice for the client to be able to not feel judged by me, and just break down, and this is just safe and it stays between us. Whereas sometimes it's hard to be that vulnerable in front of family and friends, and also sometimes you feel like you're being a burden because here you are crying again, so that's why I think it's good to have a coach who is just there regardless and is there for everything.
And also, if your friends are like mine, they are basically forget that. They're going to be very much, and I'm like, yes. And the love doesn't just go away, the care or concern. There are probably things I did post-divorce that a lot of my friends are like, I can't believe you still. And it's well, but I love how you have talked about, and all of our coaches, right? We've talked about the fact that it's really about standing for the client, and for us, that means reminding you of what you're capable of. And as you were saying this, I recognize sometimes when someone asks you what you want, sometimes you don't know. And I always say, if the first answer that's quick is, I don't know, I'm like, well, let's slow down. Let's breathe. Let's think about that. But in a moment like this, you may not really know. So the beauty of having a coach is that we're trained with a particular set of skills, and our questions that we ask in the reflections, right? So we're not just listening to the words you're saying, we're watching you, or we're listening to the inflection in your voice, we're paying attention to when things come up, because then we can ask other questions that lead you to recover that which it is that you do desire. Right? Because we do believe that you have desires, that you have wants, that you have needs. And especially if you are coming out of a relationship, you may not even, that voice may not even be loud anymore, or it may be hidden, or you might have forgotten it. So our job is to support you in the remembering, right? And into the coming back to self. So how do people find you? If someone wants to explore working with you, like where can they go?
Okay, so I'm most active on Instagram, and it's at A Beautiful Mindset Coaching. I also obviously have an email address. It's Denise at abeautifulmindsetcoaching.com. So currently I'm offering 3 and 6 month coaching packages. Clients can choose whether they want to work with me weekly or bi-weekly. It's preference, personal preference, and also depending on where they are in the divorce process. Sometimes more is needed, sometimes not. So those are the 2 packages I offer right now. I did want to mention that I'm also currently an admissions advisor for the IGC coaching school, which we both attended. And so coach training starts March 29th for anyone interested in becoming a certified life coach. I am available for any questions or information at admissions@innerglowcircle.com. But yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, Denise, thank you so much for this conversation. And we'll have to do on my other podcast at some point, we're going to have to do a conversation around going from the academic world to the coaching world, and all of our interest around art, history, the academy, because y'all,
yes, I would love that. Oh, I would love that. Yeah, we have so much more to talk about.
So much. Well, thank you for joining me today. And for those who are watching, thank you for participating, watching, listening, for being here as we continue the Elevate Coaching series, a conversation series that is specifically focused on uplifting coaches who are helping you consider new possibilities and create new realities through the power of coaching. Join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this March, this Women's History Month, as I interview another woman coach. So join me on Friday for our next conversation. So thank you so much for being with me, Denise, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.